8. The remainder of the dull winter's day dragged achingly slow. Every tick of the clock reminded Catherine that she was growing closer to learning what wickedness lay within the walls of the orphanage. She couldn't concentrate on the monotonous drawl of the 9 o'clock sermon. The priest's words had become a dull noise in the back of her head as she examined every possible scenario that Father Michael might explain. If it wasn't for the other girls sitting in her pew, she wouldn't have even known whether it was time for her to sit or stand. A knot had formed in the depths of her stomach. She caught Rose's eye from across the chapel. Rose raised her brows as if to ask if she was all right, but Catherine just smiled back and clasped her hands together, pretending to focus back on her prayers. Her little charade seemed to fool Rose, who turned her head to face the altar again. Catherine made a mental note to calm down. She couldn't risk drawing any unwanted attention to herself. The night had to go according to plan. Not one detail could be out of place. After almost an eternity, the Mass was finally over, and the rest of the orphans made their way to do their nightly chores. They all spilled out of the main double doors, eager to get started on their allotted jobs so they could go to bed. While the rest of them pushed past each other to make their way down the hall, Catherine broke off from the crowd and darted in the opposite direction. Catherine made her way down the damp stone corridor towards Father Michael's chambers. She was concerned that Sister Nora would notice she wasn't doing her chores, but her need for answers gave her the strength to carry on. Cautiously, she looked around to make sure no one had followed her. She raised her fist, hesitating for a moment, and knocked on the heavy wooden door of Father Michael's room. His response was barely audible, but she thought she heard a faint "Enter" in reply. She pushed open the door and tiptoed across the creaky threshold. The room was in total darkness. The only glimmer of light came from a small candle burning in a holder on a desk pushed back against the wall. Father Michael had his back to her, consumed with the task of writing in a worn, leather-bound book. He placed the dip pen back in the pot of black ink, but still didn't turn to face her. Instead, he pulled over a rickety chair and placed it to the side of the desk, glancing over his shoulder, gesturing for her to take a seat. "What are you writing?" she asked, craning her neck to read over his shoulder. Instead of answering her, Father Michael slammed the book shut, bound it with a fraying leather strap, and placed it in a narrow cupboard underneath the desk. He made a show of locking it with a bronze key that he pulled from his pocket. From his clenched jaw, Catherine surmised that he hadn't liked her questioning him about his writing. Before he closed the cupboard door, Catherine had seen at least another 10 books of the same design. Were they journals? Would their contents tell her what she needed to know? She decided not to push the issue further for now. She would have to figure out a way to see the contents of the books at a later stage. A heavy silence hung in the air. She was getting sick of all these awkward moments. Studying Father Michael's face, she assumed he was battling with some deep-rooted internal conflict. His nervousness was palpable, and his mouth kept opening and closing, as though he wanted to speak, but was incapable of uttering a word. She knew what she was asking him to do was a difficult task. He was probably breaking a handful of the orphanage's rules by even meeting with her, let alone telling her its secrets. She rolled her neck in frustration. Time was passing, and she had to be back in line with the other girls by bedtime. Her eyes wandered to a small, faded photograph hanging on the back of the door. She squinted and recognized the two figures in it as Father Michael and Sister Nora. They were both smiling, like two children at the peak of happiness. They both looked much younger. "You knew her, before she was like this, didn't you?" Catherine asked, barely above a whisper. Father Michael's Adam's apple bobbed in his pale throat, giving Catherine all the confirmation she needed. The priest's eyes darted to the photograph, and he let out a deep sigh. "She was a great friend of mine," he said with a brief smile. "A true companion. The type of companion that one can only dream of having in life. But all that changed as her obsession with the crucifix grew." "What is so special about the crucifix?" Catherine blurted out. It looks different from the other ones I've seen Sister Sarah and Sister Eunice wearing. But surely they're all the same, aren't they?" Father Michael rested both of his palms on the desk before reaching underneath it and pulling out a bottle of brandy. Judging by how little was left in the bottle, Katherine guessed that he must have started drinking it long before she entered the room. Maybe he needed it for courage, she thought. He leaned in closer, the pungent smell of brandy wafting on his breath as he spoke. "The crucifix that Sister Nora wears is known to be biblical in its origin. Those worn by the rest of the sisterhood are generic, more symbolic, if you will. They all come from the little sacristy shop next to the cathedral in town. In essence, there is nothing noteworthy about them, but it ensures uniformity. I am sure that you are familiar with the story of how Judas betrayed Jesus, are you not?" Katherine gave a meek nod of her head, wondering where Father Michael was going with his story and what it had to do with Sister Nora's ostentatious crucifix. Father Michael stretched his fingers, his bones cracking as he moved. "No one fully knows why Judas chose to betray him, other than the fact that he was given 30 pieces of silver from the temple priest for his actions," he said frankly. "However, that's not all he received. It isn't noted in the scriptures because the object Judas received was stolen from his own dead body before the authorities could even make a note of it. The missing object, I'm sure you can probably guess, is the very same crucifix which hangs around the neck of Sister Nora." Father Michael stopped for a moment and looked at Katherine over the top of his reading glasses, ensuring that she was fully absorbing what he was saying. "It has been said that a wandering shepherd came across the body of Judas while he was on his way to tend to his lowly flock. At first, he was horrified by the sight in front of him, as most would be. The harsh, isolated place in which he was found, and the grotesque expression of pain that was fixed on Judas's face because his soul was destined to descend into hell, was quite a scene to behold. While taking everything in, the shepherd noticed something shining on the ground beneath the body. Dotted around in multiple places lay the 30 pieces of silver, as if Judas had cast them to the ground in a mad fury before deciding to end his own life. Overcome by sheer greed, the poor shepherd quickly gathered the coins before anyone else could see what he was doing. When he stood up, he felt something hit the back of his head. Startled, he quickly turned around, dropping some of the coins in shock, and observed a gold crucifix dangling from Judas's rigid hand. The minute his eyes locked with the gold crucifix, something in him changed. Some say he heard voices, that the crucifix began whispering to him about the power and greatness he could possess. The coins no longer mattered to him, and he completely forgot about the existence of his flock. He snatched the crucifix from Judas's hand and took off across the hills, never to be seen again. They say that he was lost to the devil forever." Katherine held her hands up to stop Father Michael from speaking. "I'm not sure I understand you, Father," she said, shaking her head in confusion. None of it made any sense to her. "How can someone be lost to the devil by simply taking a crucifix? It's just an object." Father Michael glanced at Katherine as he leaned on the desk before emphasizing his next point. "The Gospel says that as soon as Jesus received the piece of bread that Jesus offered him during the Last Supper, Satan entered him. However, that's not necessarily true." He rubbed his temples. "For, you see, Satan had already entered Judas the moment he decided to betray those close to him. The very moment his hand touched the crucifix, Satan used it as a gateway to have Judas do his bidding. The crucifix had become tainted by sin, taking control of the dark side that was festering within Judas." He rubbed the spot between his eyebrows vigorously. "You see, child, Everyone has some level of darkness within them. It's ultimately what makes us human. God and the devil have coexisted within everyone since the beginning of time. What separates us is which power we succumb to. Have you ever wondered why some people are capable of committing monstrous, completely unholy acts, and yet others seem incapable of hurting even the smallest of insects? He went on without giving her a chance to answer. It's because they gave in to the evil residing within them. Over the years, there has been a string of ghastly events with people ending up dead. In each case, the same crucifix has been sighted on the neck of somebody connected with the dead person. Those who wear it have no control over their actions once the crucifix touches their neck. After a while, the people completely change in character. They become darker, their actions sadistic, and their thoughts deeply sinister. The crucifix has been involved in so much death and destruction over the centuries that it's become a sort of gateway for evil. It calls out to the next viable human soul like a siren, providing the unknowing soul with a glimpse of the immense power they can possess. Once it touches human skin, it's as if people are finally able to succumb to the will of the devil and complete whatever atrocious actions he desires. It knows what lies deep within the person's soul, what they've managed to keep at bay for years, and it feeds off it, growing more malevolent after each situation. Katherine was sitting bolt upright as she listened to his tale. This time, she was the one who was lost for words. Whoever wears that crucifix is destined to complete grave atrocities, and every time another death occurs, the evil grows stronger. That's why so many bad things have happened here, he finally admitted. How did the crucifix even end up in this orphanage if it dates back to biblical times? Katherine asked. Like many antiquities, so to speak, it has been shipped around the world over time and passed down through generations. It just so happens that the previous Reverend Mother, Sister Bernadette, inherited the crucifix from her own sister following her death. What happened to Sister Bernadette? Katherine asked with a shaky breath, already dreading the answer. Father Michael hesitated. He had anticipated that Katherine would ask this very question, but it still didn't prepare him for the mental turmoil of reliving what had happened to the previous Reverend Mother. It was as if the question itself had brought him back to that time, and he was witnessing the horror of it all over again. Towards the end of Sister Bernadette's reign in the orphanage, I was concerned for her safety. Sister Nora's fascination with Bernadette's crucifix was beginning to surpass insurmountable levels. It was all she could speak of. It was consuming her. There were times when I watched her secretly, and it was as if she was in a hypnotic trance. She would stare at Sister Bernadette and stroke her own neck, as if imagining the crucifix resting there. At that point, it wasn't even in her possession. It wasn't too long before there were a series of tragedies in the orphanage. Bernadette kept showing up with injuries that she passed off as being caused by accidents. You know, falling down the stairs and things like that. She seemed quite skittish of everyone, too, but there was no concrete explanation as to what had caused the sudden change in her character. She didn't want to speak of it, and so I never pushed her. I thought she wasn't comfortable disclosing any information to me. The orphans were terrified too, but when I questioned them, they remained silent. I think they knew who was responsible for the accidents. He stopped to gulp more brandy before he continued. Sister Nora was becoming less like the friend I had grown fond of. There was a choking darkness about her. Even her eyes seemed to change. They used to hold such warmth and optimism, but any light that had once been present was long gone. At the time, I couldn't explain it, but knowing what I do now, I believe that crucifix was already speaking to her immoral side, controlling her and pulling her towards it. The darkness was impossible to break through, despite my sincerest efforts. After a while, I realized, for the sake of my own life, I needed to keep a safe distance from her. I was afraid she would do the same things to me that she had done to those poor students. I know what you're thinking. It was weak of me to distance myself, but you've seen what she can do. You've experienced the pain she can cause, and no one wants to be on the receiving end of that. Some of the orphans had begun to whisper about strange noises coming from the chapel late at night. Some said they could even feel vibrations from the floorboards. There was one girl whose room was directly above the chapel. I don't think she had been here very long, but she claimed that someone was playing the organ in the wee hours. Father Michael fidgeted in his seat. Of course, at the time, there was no proof, and we thought the children were just making up stories as a coping mechanism, if you like. The stories were just so odd. I would have never believed them myself, were it not for one grim night. The night where I saw firsthand the true, unmitigated power that the crucifix is capable of. Father Michael gazed off into the distance, his brow furrowed as he became haunted by the memories that had been stirred up. He thought he had buried them deep within himself. I was working late in my chambers one night, and at about 3 in the morning, I felt the vibrations myself. It was so strong, it seemed to exude from the floorboards and up the walls. It continued for a few moments, and then stopped. At first I thought it must have been coming from the old pipes in the building. Old pipes are notorious for rattling when they settle. But then it happened again. It was bizarre. I wondered if it was one of the new girls playing a trick, so I rushed to the chapel to try to catch the culprit in the act. Instead, what I found shook me to the very core. It was truly horrific. I'll never be able to forget it. It made me question my faith. He rubbed his eyes as though trying to erase the image. Sister Nora was standing over the lifeless body of Sister Bernadette, who was lying crumpled in a heap on the altar steps. I could tell she was gone the moment I looked at her. There was so much blood. So much. The glow from the candelabras was creating a dull light around them. I thought perhaps she hadn't noticed me standing in the darkness, because she didn't turn around to face me. But thinking back now, her whole demeanor showed she was too strongly connected to the crucifix at that point to even care about being caught. He raised his index finger just as Katherine opened her mouth to interrupt him. Let me finish. Nora had fortified her connection to the devil by committing the most heinous sin imaginable. She wanted the crucifix so badly that she was willing to kill for it. She threw away her vows and everything holy that she believed in. He paused and shifted in his seat. She was clutching a blood-splattered candlestick so tightly, her knuckles were white. I was wondering what I should do when she suddenly hit Sister Bernadette across the side of her head, even though she was already dead. The sound of it paralyzed me. He shook his head, and a tear escaped the corner of one eye. The sheer force she was exerting forced droplets of sweat from her forehead to fall onto Sister Bernadette's face, making it look like she was crying. It was the most horrific thing I've ever had to bear witness to. He swallowed the lump that was beginning to form in his throat. When she stopped, she leaned down right into Sister Bernadette's face. By now, I could clearly see her face, and she was smiling. She snatched the crucifix from Sister Bernadette's neck and tossed the candlestick to the side, causing a clattering noise to echo throughout the empty chapel. I watched her stand up and place the crucifix around her own neck. The few candles that had remained alight throughout the horrific act suddenly died. But there was no gust of air in the chapel that could explain it. It was clear to me that God's presence was no longer in the chapel. Father Michael made eye contact with Katherine. Sister Nora looked directly at me then and said without any emotion, "I require some assistance, Father Michael. It seems that Sister Bernadette has had a most unfortunate accident."